I've gotten quite a few comments from people saying that I'm just like YouTuber David Carroll, and that some of them say that I'm even a ripoff of David Carroll. I don't see where this is the case. If you look at my videos and my views, they're completely different. I mean, when David Carroll begins his videos, he usually begins by having a beverage or lighting a cigar or cracking his knuckles. If you look at the beginnings of my videos, I just usually just go into content. If you look at the background of Mr. Carroll's videos, he usually has different props. If you look at the background of my videos, what do you see? All the books that I have published over the years. This month, I decided to change the books up and show the most recent publications I have produced on the SJS Direct imprint. Now, concerning the message, yes, we pretty much have a similar message. And my experiences with the Negro go back a little further than David Carroll's. Again, I went to school with a lot of these dysfunction with the Negro, and I saw many of his dysfunctional behaviors firsthand. And this is starting at 12 years old, way back in 1985. Now, David Carroll says he has been studying the Negro for over 20 years. I have lived in the South Bronx all my life. I have gone to schools like your IS 148, Park West High School, Taft High School, and I have seen many of the behaviors that your Negro males participate in firsthand. I have observed these behaviors, and way back as far as 1985, I instinctively looked at these behaviors and said that there was something clearly wrong with this Negro. I mean, I remember being in gym class back in 1985 when when preteen boys were asking me if I had a girlfriend, and saying to myself, what type of male asks this type of question? And I sat there at 12 years old going, why is he asking me this type of question? Usually, the only person who is concerned with who's dating who is usually a female. And as I got older, when I was in high school, I got asked this question again, and I sat there and said, why are males asking me this question? Again, this is the question a girl asks a guy when she gets him in private, but yet these guys want to ask you this question in public. And this behavior was suspect to me, and I would sit there and say to myself, this behavior really is. It's not masculine behavior. Usually, boys, are focused on their goals, and my goal was to try to get good grades, or try to find out what comments were coming out on Friday. But these guys, again, were so focused on whether I had a girlfriend or not, or I was interested in girls, and I'm sitting there going, why are you asking a heterosexual man this question? You don't have to ask this question. It baffled me for many years. And then it wasn't until I came to the YouTube community and heard other stories from other black men that I started to find out, I wasn't the only one dealing with the dysfunction regarding this Negro male. And what was even more disturbing was when I was in high school, many of these males would be talking about how they wanted to hook me up and how they wanted, to arrange things for me. Again, these are female behaviors. Women try to hook up another woman with a man because they know that 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 a man that she's interested in sees this guy, sees her being alone, and says, I might want to go talk to her. So she wants to get her out of the picture. And this is the same type of dysfunctional matchmaking behavior that I saw, you know, back at 12, 14, and 15. And that these Negro males, again, when David Carroll says that these men act like women, talk like women, behave like women, even menstruate like women, I can honestly agree with that position because, again, I have experienced this in my own personal life. And when you deal with this Negro male, he just that's just the way he is. And he's emotional, he's irrational, he's illogical, and if he sees another man that does not, go along with the clique, because again, he's also cliquish, doesn't go along with the clique and the way the clique behaves, they try to eliminate the man from the circle. Now, regular men, I've dealt with regular men in places like your Taft High School or even in Monroe College. They do their thing, I do my thing, we're all right. Every man is his own man, he does his own thing. But when it comes down to these, soft, milk toasted, feminine men, black men, everybody has to be the same. And that type of behavior, you know where that comes from. It comes from these single mothers and these female headed households. Because every man that I run into who comes from a female headed household, everybody has to be the same. Everybody has to do the same things, do things the same way, act the same way, be a part of the clique. And if you're not part of the clique, then they're going to try to do things to push you out of the circle. And I've experienced this again since I was 12 years old. I mean, I've had people who just didn't like me do stuff like stealing my things, breaking my things, trying to hide stuff from me. These are all passive aggressive behaviors that your male participates in when they want to try to push another male out of the circle. Or usually, in many cases, the female does this because she wants to push a female out of the circle. I'm not going to say male because this is what females do. Females, when they see a girl or another woman in the social circle who is not like them or who does not want to be a part of their clique or conform to their dysfunctional values, they try to push that person out because they don't want other people to notice that person and see them as a model for what manhood or womanhood can be. This is what they do. And when it comes down to this Negro male, I have had my own experiences with him, and it's just me seeing David Carroll, listen to David Carroll's videos, just like I listen to Dan Freeman's videos, T-Mot's videos, Heavenly Truth One's videos, Advice Show's videos, Iceman's videos, Rick Scorpio's videos, Harvey Superboy's videos, and coming to a consensus that, my experience is just like these black males' experiences, and we're just presenting, a consensus regarding it. Now, people think that they're going to insult me by saying that I'm just like David Carroll. Well, again, I am quite flattered because, again, what you're saying to me is that I am on the same level as the intellectual juggernaut. I am on the same level as David Carroll and the Queasy 100. That I am presenting information in the same intelligent fashion that your David Carroll has presented. That I have facts that back up my information like David Carroll has. That I do my research like David Carroll does. And for you guys to say that about me, you think you're insulting me, again, you're paying me a compliment because as a professional writer with over 25 years experience, this is what I do every day. In order for me to write books like these, I have to do my research. In order for me to write books like Stop Simping and the books in the Simp Trilogy, I have to do research. In order for me to write books like Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, I have to do my research. And that's a testament to my research and to my facts. It proves that everything that I say, and I put down is accurate and pretty much correct and cannot be deconstructed or refuted in the same way that Mr. Carroll's information cannot be deconstructed or refuted. And a lot of people, what they don't understand is that I have had these same views as David Carroll has had for many years. If anyone goes to my blog, www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com, they can go back as far as 2008, 2009, and even 2007 and see information in the exact same, with the exact same theme as your David Carroll. I mean, I was one of the first guys to start writing blogs about this black book market because I remember going there with my sister one day to a Borders and walking into the African American book section and seeing the equivalent of a Times Square sex shop. That's what I saw. And when I wrote the blog about it, way back in 2007, go into the archives of www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com. You'll see that article right there. I'm talking about how our African American book section has been turned into a cesspool. And I call it a cesspool then. That was my opinion then, and it's always been my opinion. I have done blogs for years. I have done blogs about Montana Fishburne. I have done blogs about numerous issues in the black community, and I've done numerous issues about black women. I mean, again, I wrote blogs before I even heard of a David Carroll channel, such as Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. I have written blogs like Why Black Women Are Single, going to be single for the rest of their lives. I have written blogs talking about the roles of fathers in children's lives. I have written blogs about Negro bed wenches. There are dozens of articles that I have written about this Negro and his dysfunctional situation on my blog for years. I think, and this is before I even heard of a David Carroll channel. This is before, I mean, even when I had my Onyx Link column, because I even had a column on Onyx Link from 2009 to 2010, I was criticizing people like Tyler Perry and Lee Daniels then. And I have been doing this for years. These are my views regarding these issues. These are my core values that I grew up with for years. So there may be similarities in between myself and David Carroll, but my voice is my own. My views are my own. My opinions are my own. And yeah, I am flattered that many people think that, you know, my stuff is like David Carroll's because again, he presents strong arguments and strong information, and that says that my information is strong as well. I mean, I'm a guy with a blog who's had people with doctorates use my blog as a source in their information. I have had professionals use my blog as a source for their writings, and that again is a testament to the quality of my writing, and these videos are a testament to the quality of my videos. Because if you can compare me to a David Carroll, that speaks volumes to the testament of quality that I am producing. That says that my information is rock solid. That says my information, is pretty much the research is tight. And it says that I am not only a pretty good writer, but I'm turning out to be starting to produce quality videos on that caliber of high quality. Because when I look at the videos of your David Carrolls and your Queasy 100s and your Icemans, they pretty much produce some of the best videos on YouTube regarding, the situation of the African American Negro. If I can say that I'm on that level, that speaks volumes to the testament. Because when I started doing these videos, it was so that people could get to know me and get to know the quality of the person behind the books that I write back here. Now, I write everything from fiction to African American fantasy fiction, and I want people to see, the quality of work that I produce. And when you try to insult me like this, again, it's a compliment because it says that my work is of high quality and that I am producing work that is the best it can possibly be. I mean, this is a guy, who comes from what many people from Monroe College, from the South Bronx. A guy who taught himself writing, taught himself screenwriting, and now is learning the ins and outs of making videos. And it says that, my quality level is still high and still on the same level. As your David Carroll, your Queasy 100, and your Iceman, men, White, and even Big BK who produce the best videos regarding making commentary about this Afro-American Negro. And when you look at their videos, the information, again, it's rock solid. The research is rock solid. The facts are solid and consistent. And I used a lot of some of their videos, some of the information there, and I lined it up with other research that I've had when I was doing books like Your Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. And that's why I can say, the information is pretty solid. Because again, I do my research, and when you say that he's just like David Carroll, or you're saying that he's a David Carroll clone or David Carroll knockoff, again, you're not insulting me. You're pretty much paying me a compliment because that says that I'm doing my job, and that says that my message is solid and consistent because, again, my blog has the same information. You go over to www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com. You'll see the exact same information on my blogs. You'll see the exact same information in my nonfiction, like the Simp Trilogy. You'll see the same information even in some of my fiction, like the Thetas here, or even in my ISIS series books. You'll see the same information. Everything is pretty much consistent. And there is nothing that you can break, nothing you can break apart, nothing you can pick apart. And when you have to resort to ad hominem attacks, it pretty much shows me, that I've won and that my work is solid. And when you have solid work, there is no way for you to, try to find some dirt to dig up on it or some way to pick it apart or some way to attack the person. And when you have to use ad hominem attacks to try to attack someone, it pretty much shows how weak your position is regarding someone else. Because, again, these are not just my opinions, these are my core values. This is the way I was raised, because I was raised in a very, very strict household. Education was put up at the forefront, and I spent most of my time reading, whether it's comic books, newspapers, magazines. I spent most of my time reading, and that's how I became a writer. Again, I've been writing since I was 9 years old. So when people try to attack me like this, all they're doing is proving that, I'm doing my job and I'm doing it very well. And, it shows me that, some people, they when they see the truth, as Jack Nicholson said in the movie A Few Good Men, they just can't handle the truth. And when they see this, and because they can't handle the truth, they have to go into name calling, attacks, and shaming tactics, not understanding that, there's more than one person who has the same views as David Carroll. There are other people who have had experiences similar to his. And again, I have been living around this Negro since I was born. I'm 41, going on 42 years old. Now, David Carroll says he's studied the Negro for 20 years. I've lived among the Negro for 30 years. So, if I'm living in the environment and I'm seeing these behaviors being presented in front of me, I'm going to have to agree with him because those are the behaviors I see every day. I mean, again, I see the foreign-owned stores in my own neighborhood. I've seen them. I remember when there were black-owned stores in my neighborhood when I was a little boy. And I remember when there was, black people living in the neighborhood, and I saw things in my neighborhood. I saw how the political base changed from Jewish to Hispanic, and how black people literally walked away from it. I saw what happened in the neighborhood um, regarding the property in the neighborhood. I saw that black people had this huge opportunity in the South Bronx and Harlem to buy property and build their own black community. I remember these things back in the 1980s because I remember reading newspapers and watching TV shows, and they talked about how they were selling property in 1983 on the Grand Concourse here in the Bronx, build entire buildings for $1. I remember when they were selling out brownstone shells for a couple of $100 in Harlem. I remember all of this as a little boy and saying to myself, I always wanted to own the building that I lived in on Park Avenue on 167th Street. I mean, and I always saw that, if you own something, that meant you could control something. But when the Negro, when you present him with these facts, he gets upset. And I can even go back and talk about stories my own mother and father have told me, regarding their experience here in the South Bronx. So when I talked about that in that video, gentrification, hipsters, and the Negro, that's stuff that actually happened in my own neighborhood um, when my mother and father were younger. They often told me about the Negroes in the neighborhood who would break into people's apartments and steal stuff out of their apartments. They told me about the Negroes who got jealous and would key other people's cars. And this is why people moved out of those of inner city areas once they got a decent job and decent money and moved to the suburbs or other areas. This is why I can present those facts. And I even watched an NBA documentary about the Detroit Pistons yesterday. And in that documentary, they talked about the 1967 riots and how it literally destroyed downtown Detroit, and how people, after those riots, moved from the cities to the suburbs. This was in a documentary. So when people say that David Carroll, makes these statements, I can say that he has facts to back it up. Because when I saw that documentary about the Detroit Pistons, I thought about what David Carroll said, and I said, he pretty much told the truth. And then I was reading about Orbox because I was doing research about the 1940s and the store Orbox, and they left Newark because of those 1960s riots. So many people left the cities and went to the suburbs because of those riots that entire communities pretty much lost their economic base. So everything David Carroll said about this Negro destroying his own economy pretty much was true. It's pretty much backed up with facts, and it shows me, how concrete his research is, you know, and how it even because I do research myself, and now all the research he says pretty much is fact. Just like he said about the Democratic Party. You know that the Ku Klux Klan and the Democratic Party? I saw that in a fourth grade history book, way back in the 1980s. That's how true that is. And, that's a fact that's been there for years. But, you tell the Negro about facts, and he gets upset. And he doesn't want to hear things that are true because they relate to truths regarding him and his own accountability and personal responsibility. You listen to this Negro, and everything about him is he tries to find some way, shape, or form to turn himself into a victim so that people can feel sorry for him, because in his own codependent way of thinking, he thinks that the victim is a position of power, and if he can get people to feel sorry for him, he can get some crumbs from their table, and he's just satisfied with those crumbs, not understanding if he learns the process of making cake, he can not only have his own bakery, but sell his own cakes to other people. And That's something that David Carroll doesn't even talk about. In my videos, when I talk about the Negro, sometimes I talk about the codependency that this Negro has and his need to be a victim based from a mental health perspective. That goes back to my research on simping and nice guys, because this is where I started learning about this Negro's mental health issue situation, because I wrote an entire blog about it called Racism and Codependency, because I see a codependent relationship that this Negro has with white liberals. And in this relationship, the Negro continues to point fingers at his abuser, and the abuser throws crumbs at him, because that's what they do in a codependent relationship. That's why a codependent relationship is a downward spiral. Again, that's not something David Carroll talks about, but it's something I talk about, because I want the Negro to understand his psychological condition. I want him to understand, there are some mental health components that relate to this, and that codependent relationships are completely dysfunctional because both sides are jockeying for which one is going to be the victim. And what happens with the Negro is he gets into this codependent relationship with this white liberal, where he plays this shuck and jive, blame and shame game, where the white liberal abuses him, then he points the finger at the white liberal gives him some crumbs, and then, they go back and start the cycle all over again. It's a vicious cycle which leads to a downward spiral. But you try to explain this to the Negro, and he looks at you with this blank look like that. That's what he looks at you like, because he doesn't want to process the information. Now, I have had critical thinking skills again since I was 13 years old, and I was able to see things, regarding this Negro for years. I remember being 13 years old and saying to myself, and all these guys kept trying to bug me about sex, and I kept saying to myself, if you don't have sex, you won't have any illegitimate children. That was a critical thinking thought right there. I remember being 16 saying to myself, you know, if these two, because I was reading an article about how these two guys one guy had killed one guy over this girl, and I said to myself, you know, one of you is in jail, the other one is dead, and she's still out here looking for two other fools to play. And that, again, that's just using critical thinking. And when you use critical thinking skills, you can look at a situation or look at a picture and see things for what they truly are. I mean, in those two situations, that was me as a small boy, as a teenager, looking at things from a logical perspective. Now, I can't do algebra, but I can sure understand logic. And I understood in both those cases regarding these women who people kept trying to push on me, and not letting me find who I want to find, because I always believe that if the women like you, they'll come to you. But these guys kept trying to push and push and push, and they pretty much showed me, that they had no reasoning skills, no critical thinking skills, and they didn't want to, take a minute and observe things. Now, in those situations, I talk about, if you don't have sex, you don't have children, or which is critical thinking, or if one of you is dead and the other one is in jail, she's out here with two other guys, and you're just too stupid. And many of these Negroes at the time were just too stupid to figure out this simple concept. Because again, Negro does not have critical thinking skills. He does not have reasoning skills. And, most of these Negroes, I learned even back then, were all on their emotions. And all they want to do is just push your buttons, agitate you, look for arguments, look for fights, because again, they don't know how to solve a problem. They don't know how to present information to you in a constructive manner. They don't want to think about anything. They just want to react. They don't want to use their minds. And the sad part is that, if the Negro just used a little bit of that brain of his for something other than a hat rack, they might be able to make some progress in the world. Now, some people would say that's insulting, but sometimes you just have to look at things the right way. I mean, we've had 40 years of dysfunction in the African American community, and instead of things getting better, they're getting worse. And I can honestly say that I see them getting worse, because Hispanics, I live here in the South Bronx, Hispanics have pretty much passed Negro by. They pretty much have all the political offices here in the South Bronx. They have a large business base here in the South Bronx. And all of that was something the Negro could have had himself. Back in the late 60s and the 70s, he could have built that up. But instead, he was out having a good time, buying himself Oldsmobile Cutlass Supremes, Cadillac DeVilles, and in the 80s buying themselves Nissan Maximas and Mercury Cougars and trying to impress women, while these Hispanic males were putting themselves first, building businesses, building enterprise, building political power, and taking themselves to the next level. Now there were Hispanic guys who were told that they were acting white, but they didn't care. They were like, look, we're going to build our own infrastructure and our own businesses. We're going to protect ourselves and our own businesses. And now the borough president is Hispanic. We're on the third or fourth Hispanic borough president. City council has a lot of Hispanic representatives here in the Bronx. State senator is Hispanic, and the county clerk is Hispanic. All of these positions could have been had by black people, but black people, again, didn't want to roll up their sleeves and do the work. Um, and this is just me in New York, because this is what I've seen. The same thing with Asians. Asians got so much economic power off the Negro, they were able to leave and go to Queens. That's how much money they made off the Negro. I remember being on Fordham Road and 3rd Avenue. There were at least a dozen stores run by Koreans. Once the Koreans made enough money, they moved to Queens. They were like, okay, we've made enough money off of this Negro that we can not only send our kids to private schools, we can send money to China, and we can just move away and get ourselves our own homes and start our own businesses and make money from ourselves. That's how much money they made off this Negro. And right now, I see Africans making the same money off the Negro, Arabs making money off the Negro, and he's further and further behind every other race. Everybody is not only caught up to him, they've passed him by. I mean, Indians have passed him by. I just see this every day. And it saddens me that many Negroes just can't figure this out. They can't figure out that you are 40 years behind the 8 ball, and the sad part is you had all the opportunity in the world, and because you do not have the vision or the imagination to take yourself to the next level, you don't see what you could have had. And I see what you could have had. I mean, Harlem was yours for the taking. South Bronx was yours for the taking. The opportunity for building that black community everybody talks about was right. Your pro-blacks and all these red, black, and green Negroes, that was all there. And it was right opportunity. The money was there, because I don't care what anybody says about redlining. There were black banks out there just like there were Hispanic banks, because these Hispanics and these Asians said, look, if these white people won't give me any money, I'm going to go to this Hispanic bank, I'm going to go to this Asian bank, or I'm just going to save up all my own money, or do what I did when I was publishing these books. I'm going to save up my own money and start things myself. All these people found opportunities, while your Negro just still sits there waiting with his hat in his hand, waiting for somebody else to come do it for him. And I'm sorry, nobody's going to come and do it for you. This was a lesson I learned way back in 1989, when my grade advisor told me that I was pretty much screwed. And I said, I'm just going to take my education into my own hands. After I prayed to God to change my life for the better, and I changed schools, I began taking my education into my own hands, and I began doing for myself, because I realized I cannot rely on others. If I want something out of life, I have to do it for myself. Same thing with these books here. When I saw that these trade publishers weren't going to publish books like African American fantasy fiction or positive stories about the African American experience, I took my own money and I went out and I published my own books. This is something that your Negro is afraid to do. This is something that your Negro is afraid to step up. He's afraid that if he steps up and that they take that crutch out from under him of racism and white supremacy, that he'll have to be responsible for himself, and he'll have to remain responsible for himself. He is so afraid of falling that he never stands up to become the person that he or she should be. And because they won't do that, Negro race continues to be left further and further behind. Now, if that sounds like David Carroll, then you're definitely wrong, because this is the way many black people have these same views. I grew up with these views. I grew up with these values. My mother and father would not let me give up on myself back in '89 when I was at the worst point in my life, and I wouldn't give up on myself. I mean, I have been through quite a few things in my life. Again, I've had a brain aneurysm when I was 7. People have been telling me I should have been in special ed for years, and my family would not let me be a victim. I would not let myself be a victim. I never grew up with a narrative of victimization in my mind, in spite of people continuing to try to push a victimization narrative on me. I continued to persevere and push. And, I fought to get my high school diploma. I fought to get my college degree. I fought to start my own publishing imprint. I used my own money, and everything that David Carroll says, I see it as true. I see it as possible because I have made every effort, to continue to push and try to move myself forward. Now, am I where I want to be? Not yet. I mean, one of these days, I would love to have one of these books be a bestseller. I would love to have a book, sell 1 million copies or even 100,000 copies. I would love to see that happen. And the only way for me to do that, I see, is for me to go out and do it myself. I can't wait for others to do for me what I have to do for myself. And I have been pushing for the last 7 years, even though I have been unemployed and out of work. I have still been pushing and trying to push myself to the next level. And that's just something that I have been doing on my own, because I remember the day before I got fired, God said to me to keep going. And I said to myself, I'm just going to have to keep going. I didn't know I was going to be fired, but I went out there, and after I lost my job that week, I continued to persevere. I continued to push towards meeting the goals that I had set for myself, because I had set a goal for myself to get all my books published, because I had like 4 or 5 manuscripts finished and sitting in boxes. And I said to myself, I want to get these books published. I want to make them real books. And I went out and I started the SJS Direct Imprint, published All About Maryland first, published The Temptation of John Haynes second, and then followed that up with All About Nikki the same year, and put out a bunch of ebooks as well. And then the following year came out with the starting of the Simp trilogy and other books. Started the ISIS series in 2012, and then published the Thetas in 2013. And I have been, again, persevering and pushing towards pushing this brand together. And just because I listen to the views of a David Carroll does not mean that I'm copying him. It means that I have learned a lot of the things that I identify with many of the experiences he's had, and many of the points he presents I have experienced in my own life. And this is, again, I'm a poor guy from the South Bronx. I have experienced much of what he has done. I have seen what he has seen regarding this Negro. Um, Again, I was right in the gym class with these Negroes and these Puerto Ricans and other males, and I've seen this behavior firsthand. This is why I can agree with him, because I've seen it firsthand. I have seen these behaviors presented in front of me. Again, all those behaviors I mentioned in the video, I've experienced them and seen them, so I can talk about them. And I can talk about them because I was a witness to them. And, it's just sad that you can't present a difference of opinion to black people. And what I'm finding is, unless you follow this single narrative of victimization, most Negroes don't want anything to do with you. It's like you're a pariah in your own black community. Because I have experienced this, again, for the last 30 years, because I refuse to follow this narrative of victimization. I refuse to be a part of that, narrative of victimization. I refuse to believe in victimization. And if that's the way it's going to be, then I guess I should try to find another way to interact with African Americans, because I'm not going to buy into that narrative of victimization. I refuse to buy into that narrative of victimization, because I know what happens when you become a victim. You lose your personal power, you lose everything, and you wind up depending on somebody else. Now, that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.